is we have had to work really hard to co-parent and understand the healthier way to do that, because that's all he had in his toolbox. That's all he knew in his toolbox. Because what I know to be true is no parent starts this job out wanting to do it poorly. Every one of us wants to do the best thing for our children. But we have, lots of it has to do with our own history. And sometimes we try to ignore that. We try to pretend that that's not there. And I really believe that one of the healthy ways to get healthy in the way that you teach your children is to do some reflection. What I can tell you again, and often when I do this particular class, it's in a series, and the following week, I'll have some people come back and they are really pretty upset with their parents. They are really feeling angry at a mother or father that didn't give them what they needed. And what I can tell you is they did the best they could with what they had. And you know, the unfortunate thing is doing stuff like you're all doing here tonight wasn't happening 40 years ago. You were reading a book about Dr. Spock or something that's, but that was it. It wasn't happening at this level where you could have these kinds of conversations. So as you sit here tonight to say, how am I going to get, if your goal here is to become an authoritative parent, to be that person right there that has routines, that has boundaries, that has consistency within the house, my job here, my goal here tonight is to give you the tools in order to do that. And I want you to remember that part of being a healthy parent means that you're going to do it really good sometimes. And then some days you're going to have bad days, and you're going to go to authoritarian land, or you're going to go to permissive land. The most important thing is you recognize when you enter that, and that you bring yourself back and get the support you need to be in that healthy place. So being an authoritative parent, it's impossible to navigate there all the time. It's impossible. But to make that your goal, to hover there the best that you can. And some of the things that are all important to it is your support system, your self-care system, and the dynamics. Now, as I start to talk about discipline here tonight, what is really important to me, many of the strategies I'm going to talk to you about and sort of the detective work, I'm going to ask you to become detectives, is recognizing that under the age of 3, so children, those toddlers, those under the age of 3 people, the biggest tool in your discipline toolbox is redirection. No, you're not supposed to be doing that. Not supposed to be doing that. Redirection is your biggest tool because cognitively they're not ready for some of the other things. So before I start to create detectives here, questions or thoughts or I'm not sure what you mean or anything like that? Okay. So as we get to that place, as you're doing some self-reflective work, how do we begin to find out how to become a healthy, authoritative parent? One of the very first parts of it is to understand behavior. So Alfred Adler, and he's really a guru for a lot of this work around positive discipline. In a lot of the books that have been written, it's his philosophy that's there. And so it's called A Misbehaving Child is a Discouraged Child. So what this actually means is there's many of us here, and you don't have to raise your hand, that believe that some days when our children get out of bed, they put both feet on the floor and they jump out of the bed, and we believe that the first thought that comes to their head is, how can I piss them off today? We actually do. And what I can tell you is what this statement is telling us is that every single day children jump out of bed and they put both feet on the floor, and they do have this thought that comes to their mind, but it isn't how can I piss them off, it is how do I get my needs met today. So children's behavior, there is no such thing as a bad child. Their behavior is the tool set that they have to get their needs met. And so when we think about being a healthy parent, using healthy discipline and positive discipline strategies, the very first part of it is understanding what we call the goal of the behavior. What is the behavior telling me that this child is that needs or they're trying to do? Does this make sense? So when we start to look at this part here, we look at, there's 5 reasons that we identify that children will use behavior to get their needs met. And I can tell you that Pauline is going to make a copy of this particular one for you all, and you'll just have to call Pauline to get it. But it's a chart that kind of is your script of how you're going to be able to understand this. But so we know that the 5 reasons that children will use behavior to get a goal met. The first one is attention. And for you as a parent, how do I know my child needs attention? The way that you can tell that that's what this behavior is about is because I'm annoyed by my child. Why do they keep doing that? Why do they keep saying, mommy, 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 mommy? Why do they keep throwing something after? And if I'm annoyed, that is my first clue that they're looking for some attention. So now, I often say this, and I think pediatricians, if anybody here a pediatrician, I think you're brilliant. But a lot of times when I think that they spent a lot of time in biology or chemistry or whatever it is, but not always in understanding the behavior behind things. So there's a whole lot of pediatricians that are giving out this little pearl of wisdom when it comes to children that are seeking attention. And the pearl of wisdom that they give out is ignore it and it'll stop. That is a lovely pearl of wisdom. Ignore it and it'll stop. How many of you parents have children that are looking for attention, and if you ignore it, it goes from bad to worse? Yeah. And that has a lot to do with who your child is and their inborn temperament. So a child that is a really strong-willed child, and you know that child because they're a dog with a bone, they're not giving it up. Trying to ignore their attention-seeking behavior is going to get ugly. So if they were tapping you on the back with a spoon and you decided I'm going to ignore, they're going to get a baseball bat and crack you up the backside. So ignoring some children, that behavior will stop. It absolutely will. But it is not a recipe for everything. So when children are seeking attention, one of these crazy thoughts out there is maybe give them some in an appropriate way. And we all do what we get attention for. So if the only way I get your attention is when you're yelling at me, or you're telling me to stop, or you're telling me to do something else, then that's working. Attention is attention, whether it's good or bad. We just want that human connection. So if you're ignoring it and it stops, terrific. The way you'll be really successful, if it stops and your child is doing what you want them to do, and you want to see more of that, you need to give attention for that. Thank you for remembering soft voices when the baby's sleeping. I really like when you do that. That child, it wants to please you. Children are designed to please us. But if that's not working, they're going to go to the other tools. The other piece, which I'll discuss in greater detail in a minute, is what we call logical and natural consequences as well. And that works very closely with attention-seeking behavior. So again, if I'm annoyed by my child, one of the things that I often talk about too is the way that we listen and communicate. So I can tell you this, that actively listening to your children for 3 minutes means they don't spend 25 minutes trying to get your attention. And when we actively listen to our young children, it's coming down to this level right down here. It's this piece here, and I'll talk a little bit further about that in a few minutes. So that's where attention is. And now the next one is about power. And when my child is seeking power, I know this because I'm challenged. I'm arguing with a 4-year-old. I'm debating with a 5-year-old. What the hell is wrong here? And so when I am in that process, that back and forth, children that are seeking power and control, you're going to be battling back and forth, and those power struggles will come into that factor as well. What I can tell you is, if you're in that place of healthy discipline, authoritative discipline, when it comes to power and control, giving our children 2 choices is an absolute way to give them what they need as well as teach. Parents sometimes think that those 2 choices still are the child's choices. And so what that means is those 2 choices still get to be yours. So you get to the supermarket and you're in the busy parking lot and you say to your child, you can hold my hand or I'll carry you. It's not safe to be alone in the parking lot. And you have this brilliant child that says, I can run faster than you. I don't want to do either of those things. I'm going to run. When you're the parent or caregiver, it's about staying with those 2 choices. You can hold my hand or I will carry you. The child that continues to debate with you, I don't want to do either of those things. I want to run as fast as I can. And I can go south with this and say something like, listen to me, they can't see you, they can only see my big bum. And then there'll be an ambulance here, and then there'll be I can do that. Or I can be a parent that is teaching and modeling and saying, today I'm going to make the choice and I'm going to carry you. Your child is not going to say, thank you, I'm so confused. They are going to be resistant. They're going to be a little pissed with that. And when it comes to healthy discipline, it's about saying, I know, and tomorrow I know you can make the choice. But today, and when we throw that word but in, we actually reignite the power struggle. We bring it back on when we have to throw our but into the end of the conversation. This is my job. So when children are challenged and are looking for control, giving them two choices, and you get to be, those choices both come from you, not the child's option. I think I've shared with you, I have this little person that visits my life every summer, and this is a single mom, and she just feels, she's ridden with guilt. She has no reason to feel guilty, but she's decided that that's the coat she's going to wear. And so when she gives choices to this child, they're endless. So it is exhausting to watch this family, and it's like a Chinese fire drill watching them get in the car. Because how many people does this child get to debate? We'll put her in the seat. I'm like, it's not about that. You sit in this seat, I'm putting you in that seat, and that's how this is going to go. It's exhausting to watch it. And supporting this mom about, don't feel guilty. And she goes, what if she gets mad at me? And I'm like, that's your job. Guess what? Your children are going to say, I don't like you. And that means you're doing your job sometimes when our kids have to say that, because this is big stuff. So both attention and power, which I'll speak to on those logical and natural consequences coming up, those fall under that umbrella. These next ones here, feeling of inadequacy and revenge, they come together. And so we know that feeling of inadequacy comes in a couple of times in development. It comes in the really little guys, because they're still developing a lot of skills that they need. So frustration comes easily and they feel defeated. Then it comes again at that adolescent place when, you know, nobody likes me, I have no friends, I'm not smart, that kind of thing there. We know that our child's behavior, sort of self-sabotaging themselves or not being able to engage and play nicely with their friends type of thing, when we feel hopeless for our child, like, oh my God, is anybody going to invite them to a birthday party? When we have that kind of feeling there, this is about emotion. The revenge one is when we feel hurt by our child. I hate you, Mommy. You smell daddy. You're not nice. I'm going to tell my teacher about you. When we feel hurt by our child, that's about big, big emotions. It really is. And very often, especially on the one of revenge, when we hear, I hate you, Mommy, I don't like you, it is a real knee-jerk reaction for us to say, that's not nice, you need to go to your room. And the reality is when our children are using that kind of behavior, they're telling us that they have some really big emotions inside that don't make sense. And so we have to, when we look at behavior, when we look at feeling of inadequacy and we look at revenge, what our children need then is not logical consequences, is not natural consequences. They need an emotional connection. And I'm going to give you some real clear examples of that as we move this through. Avoidance and changing the level of stimulation. And this is really, in the early years, those first top four were the ones we knew about. We absolutely see this. And so we see children that figure out pretty quickly that this is overstimulating for me. So the child, when you take them to the mall at Christmas time, that cannot handle a lot of stimulation, and you say to them, you better be good or we're going to go home. They figure out pretty quickly that I know how to get this party going. If I'm not good, you already told me that's my out, that I'm going to get to go home. And so children will do what they can to either bring the level of stimulation up or bring it down. Sometimes it's about leaving someplace, sometimes it's other things. And I had a center once that called me in, and I get called in lots of times in centers to look at children and behavior. And most of the time it's boys, this many times it's girls. And this particular time they had a little girl and they said, oh God, Cindy, she's probably going to be in jail before she's in high school. And I'm like, what the hell is this little 4-year-old doing? And so I went to the center and I looked and I observed this little girl for a couple of hours. She was brilliant. She was playing in the make-believe. She had a little restaurant gig going on, and then she had a little garage thing repairing cars. She had some real great stuff going on with her friends. And they're telling me, they go, she harms people. She does all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Then they bring me into her second classroom, and she had the most softest speaking teacher in the entire world. And this teacher was just as gentle and as soft and kind and loving. And my little one had all kinds of energy. And we knew that because she sat right on her knee and she was bouncing right at circle time. She was like watching the popcorn on the pop. And her teacher was like, oh, children, I'm so glad you're here. This is a lovely day. And this little girl was like, I'm excited too. and so the teacher said, we're going to do our regular circle thing, and we're going to start off with our weather. And she was, oh, I love the weather. And she's telling her friends. Well, the teacher picked this little girl over here who was like in a coma. She was like, like this. And that little girl's name was, I don't know, Delilah. And she said, Delilah, you get to be the weather person. Well, the weather person in this particular classroom got to be like a Patriots cheerleader, and they got pom-poms, and they got to say the weather. So Delilah in the coma over here goes, it's raining, it's raining. So my little one that's bouncing on her knee leaps across the circle and goes, that's not how you do it. And she's doing the pom-poms, and she leaps on this child, and I go, there is nothing wrong with this child. This teacher needs a little bit of a little fire in here, a little bit of energy, because she's trying to get it up here and nobody's responding to it, and it's becoming pretty unsettled. And so this girl was getting such a reputation, and it really came down to the level of stimulation. You know the kids that needed increased or decreased, but so often we look at it as children not behaving. And if we're paying really close attention and recognizing that when they come out of that environment, or we give them something to physically move their body, they can settle down. And so very often we confuse healthy behavior with just doing nothing. And so when we're talking here, those logical and natural consequences are a really critical part of how you kind of work with these things. So logical consequences, they require a thought, they're a result of your actions. So that means when you're teaching your children, especially on those things around attention and power, you're giving your children tools to be able to do this. And so one of the things that I did very first thing tonight was went over the rules of the guidelines. Children love to know what the boundaries are. From the very earliest stage, your children are begging you to show me where the boundaries are. And your children, because they're brilliant, they are brilliant. When you say, here's the boundary, your children are so brilliant that they're going to go up and they're going to say, is this the line? And you're going to say, yes, that's the line. And then the brilliant child is going to say, what if I push this line just a little bit further out there? Our job as parents is to say, yeah, we're going to bring it back where it belongs. And what happens when we let the children kind of decide where the line is, it's a very scary place to be. And children become a hot mess. Children are begging for where the lines are. When it comes to using logical consequences, there's this thing here called the 3 R's, that it's reasonable, it's related, and it's respectful. So I know that I am not being an authoritative parent when I think my reasonable sounds like this. You're never going to ride in a bike again. You'll never drive a car again. When I'm saying those things, I'm not being reasonable. So reasonable means that there's a lifespan here, that you're not going to be able to ride your bike for a week because you didn't wear your helmet. That's reasonable. That it's related.